Hi, welcome to another edition of the Alan Rosenberg Show. I'm in a good mood. I just came back from a record show. Little sneak peek. One of the things I got for all you Queen fanatics. I got a 5.1 DVD audio disc of A Night at the Opera. That's right, I'm not giving up on Queen yet, but this will be a video for another video when I do a haul from the record show. Today, time to have some fun. Don't take this too seriously, but I'm sure you have some albums in your collection that you don't love, maybe even hate, or they really piss you off for a particular reason. And that's what this video is about. These are albums I hate from artists I love in my collection. Now, I might hate these for different reasons. We're going to go through them one by one. I just picked out at random some selections that instantly stuck out that I just have a craw in my neck about these albums. So let's go into it in no particular order, because I like to do that, rambling. Let's just do it. Now, some of the ones you're thinking I'm going to do, you're not going to see. What are you thinking about? Like Trout Mask Replica from Captain Beefheart. Bought it, couldn't stand it, but I got rid of it. Metal Machine Music is another one that instantly pops up in everybody's head by Lou Reed. I bought it, unlistenable, got rid of it. I tend not to keep albums that I hate unless I'm a completist on that artist. What's another one? Those John and Yoko albums. You're not going to see Two Virgins or the Wedding album. I bought Two Virgins. Unlistenable. Got rid of it. Yeah. Had no thrill seeing John and Yoko naked from the front of them. So got rid of it. You're not going to see these. These are albums that in my collection, everything on my videos is about what I own. So let's talk about one. Now I have a series, if you go into playlist, called Treasure or Trash, where I talk about albums that are pretty much considered the worst album by that band, or amongst their worst albums, and I talk about it. There's not going to be a lot of duplication, but this one is duplication because this is the one that pops into my head right away. From The Who, you know I am a huge Who fan. They're my second or third favorite band. And Endless Wire, there's a whole video on this album, and Treasure or Trash, but this album pissed me off. To this day, I can't get over how angry I am about that album. Because this was the first album they did since 1982's It's Hard. Now, I was a fan of It's Hard, and I was a fan of Face Dances. The reality is, if you were a big Who fan, you knew that Keith Moon was kind of on the way out. It's sad to say, they've admitted it to this day. You know, Roger Daltrey and especially Townsend talk about the fact that Keith Moon was on his last legs. If you listen to Who Are You, the album, there's very little Keith Moon on there. Besides the great title track, he's pretty much non-existent on that album. He just couldn't play anymore. So, Kenny Jones was a breath of fresh air, and I like It's Hard and I like Face Dances. They're not classic albums. But I was so excited for them to release their first new album. It was going to be 24 years, I think it was, something like that. When did this album come out? 26 years. No, 82. 24 years it took for The Who to release a new album, Endless Wire, and I was so excited about it. And when I got it, I was like, the songs to me didn't do much. But here's the kicker and where it really pisses me off. So The Who obviously is a band that needs a really great drummer. And when they did Endless Wire, they had Zach Starkey, the most perfect replacement drummer for Keith Moon. He can play in Keith's style, but he's still a timekeeper, very powerful. But look at Endless Wire. Did you ever look at that? Look at what it says over there. It says, The Who principal musician, Zach Starkey. He only plays the drums on one song, drums on track 5. The rest are either done by Pete Townsend, I believe, or Peter Huntington, who I have no idea who that is, who plays on those other tracks. So this album, The Who, desperate for big drums, there's like, how do you release an album in 24 years with the drums sounding like they do on Endless Wire? The other fact is that the songs are just, to me, not that good. That mini opera is not that impressive. In the Ether, God, I can't even listen to that thing. So, yep, one of the first ones I'm thinking about, Endless Wire. If you want a full analysis of it, check the Alan Rosenberg Show playlist. Go to Treasure or Trash. There is a video just on Endless Wire. Now, here's another album that drives me crazy, and that's the band Blondie. I am a big Blondie fan, and now I'm not doing The Hunter because I like The Hunter. That's in Treasure or Trash. This is, the latter-day Blondie albums are good, some better than others. They had released an album called Panic of Girls, which was a really strong album. But then they released an album called Ghosts of Download. And it came in this box set with 3 discs in it. But this was a brand new Blondie album called Ghosts of Download. Blondie is blessed as a great band. One of the things I love about them, they play all different styles. They have an amazing drummer in Clem Burke. So how on earth did they release an album that's, to me, pretty much all electronica kind of stuff? This is the album. Clem Burke, I don't even know if he's on the album. If he is, you barely hear him. The songs don't connect with me at all. It is quite possibly the least played, most hated album of new material that I have in my collection by anybody. That's how much I didn't like Ghosts of Download. Problem was, it came in this really nice box set that actually included them redoing their greatest hits, probably like a Taylor Swift kind of thing before Taylor did it, to try to get publishing again. But the best thing was this, live at CBGB's in 1977. So it's still a worthwhile purchase just to get that DVD. That's a DVD. You don't need them redoing their greatest hits. They're not as good as the original versions. And this Ghost of Download, horrendous. I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, I guess they were thinking they wanted to do something completely different. That's what they were thinking. But you got a great drummer in Clem Burke who's crucial to the sound of that band. Not for me. You want to talk about a band, Desperation. The bands that hit Desperation, sometimes they do terrible decisions. Now, I'm a huge fan of Wishbone Ash. Wishbone Ash has had their ups and downs. The mid-'80s, early '80s, they were doing new wave of British heavy metal. They did Twin Barrels Burning. They did Raw to the Bone. Really didn't sound like classic Wishbone Ash, but they were still decent records. Some really good songs on those albums. But then they really were at wit's end. They released 2 trance kind of albums, like the DJs, and people just dancing to the clubs, whatever they were taking, E and Ecstasy and dancing in the clubs. Wishbone Ash did not one, but 2 albums of trance kind of music. This was one called Trance Visionary, and it's exactly what that is. It's like trance DJ music, some Wishbone Ash guitar in there. There's another one. This is a different album called Psychic Terrorism, and this was a double disc, no less. It is so un-Wishbone Ash, but they were just at desperation. Andy Powell and the rest of Wishbone Ash were just desperate to try to make a living and keep going and trying different things. Not the best idea. So I typically never mention those 2 Wishbone Ash albums, but if you ever find them out there, stay away. All right. The other album that I did a full video on, Treasure or Trash, is this one. You can't do albums that you hate by bands you love without mentioning The Clash, Cut the Crap. Now, here's the thing about this album. It's actually pretty fascinating. It came after Combat Rock. They were at their peak. They were fighting, and Joe Strummer throws Mick Jones out. And then they're woodshedding. They're actually taking new tracks, a new lineup, and they're popping up into different places. There's a documentary film on it. There's a great book that I read about this part of the Clash. And they actually have coming up, Joe Strummer's coming up with some really, really good songs. But then when they recorded the album Cut the Crap, they just went into the studio, they got rid of all of that Clash-like stuff, and they just did this mess of an album. I'm not going to go into it track by track because I already did it in Treasure or Trash. But in this album, there's actually some good songs. You just can't hear them because the production is just so god-awful. It's noisy, it's messy, it's not Clash-like. But, even like We Are the Clash, there's a great song buried in there somewhere. I only hope that one day somebody gets their hand on the original tapes and redoes this album to make it a Clash album, because some of the songs on here are really good, or potentially really good. I will say that This Is England is an amazing song, and they actually put that on some of their compilations, which leads me to another beef that I have, especially with Cut the Crap. And that is, the Clash have conveniently in their history pretended that that album doesn't exist. And you can't do that. It is part of the Clash history. Like it or not, as terrible it is, it's part of the Clash history. Don't whitewash your history. I can't stand when bands do that. Cut the crap is part of the Clash history. And own up to it. That's the story. Now, of course, Mick Jones had the last laugh because he put out Big Audio Dynamite, and that was a big hit and a lot better than that. So, cut the crap. Got to put that in. Albums you hate by bands you love. Let's talk about, again, in no particular order, Bob Dylan. Now, Bob Dylan, I love. How many Bob Dylan albums do I have? I don't know. 92 Bob Dylan albums. I don't even have every Bob Dylan album. I have almost all of them, but I don't have all of them. So, he was on a roll. Listen, his voice changed, right? All of that kind of stuff. Then he did Tempest, great album. And then between Tempest, which came out in 2012, and then Rough and Rowdy Ways, an album that critics fell over themselves saying that it's the greatest thing of all time, that came out in 2020. So the 8-year span between these two albums. What did Bob Dylan do? He released not one, not two, but 3 albums of standards, of him singing with his great band standards. The first one was Shadows in the Night. It's the only one that I have. And the reason why it's the only one I have is because it's an album that I never, ever feel like listening to. The reality is I accept Bob Dylan's voice the way it is, the quality of it. His voice has changed throughout his career. But obviously his voice from his age and the gruffness is not a particularly overly pleasant thing to hear because of the quality of his voice. But the songwriting on Tempest and, of course, Time Out of Mind, the songs are amazing, so you can deal with it. I don't really need to hear Bob Dylan singing Frank Sinatra standards. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's certainly not the best thing in the world, and it's not something that I ever really feel like listening to. The other thing that I have, and it's going to come up in this video a bunch, is that critics really piss me off because they trip over themselves. Whatever a legendary artist does, it's the greatest thing, it's so important. These 3 albums that Dylan did of standards, they are what they are. But don't say they're like these great 4 or 5-star albums. It drives me crazy because they're not. Another one you got to point out, let's say, is Guns N' Roses, of course. I don't love Guns N' Roses. I appreciate them, but I have all their albums. I don't have a huge discography, obviously. But the first album's a classic, and Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 have their share of great songs. Even Spaghetti Incident is a fun listen. But the problem with the Chinese Democracy was, they spent $8 billion on it. It was always in the news. They know how to use the public relations, and it's coming out, and they doing this, and they change the lineup for this, and then finally it comes out, and to me, it's so loud, and it's kind of like cut the crap. There's so much layering on it, so many edits. Where is the music? It's buried in there. There are some fine songs on there, if you could hear them. It's just a messy sounding album that to this day has not grown on me, unfortunately. So Chinese Democracy, we got to put that in there as well. All right, let's keep going. How's that this pile? How about we got to talk about David Bowie? How many David Bowie albums I have? Got to be in the 80s as well. I am a huge Bowie fan. Bowie, I have all of his albums, although since he passed away, there's a million reconfigurations. I don't have all of those. But I'm a huge Bowie fan. But no secret that his career has albums that are meh. In fact, Treasure or Trash, I talked about Tonight. I don't think Tonight is terrible. I don't think it's great. But it's not as bad as a lot of people think. But if you want to talk about, let's say, lousy Bowie albums or subpar Bowie albums, you would talk about Tonight. You would talk about Never Let Me Down. Right? Never Let Me Down. You might talk about Tin Machine. You might talk about Tin Machine 2. You might even talk about Black Tie, White Nights. All of these albums, though, have songs on there that I really like, and I could listen to them and still get some enjoyment out of it. It's been a really long time since I've heard this album. Let me know if I'm missing anything, but this album is an album that just never grew on me, and that's Outside 1. It's supposed to be a thematic thing, but there never was another section of it, The Diary of Nathan Adler. Really great packaging. When it came out, I was really pumped up. And I had that Trent Reznor 9 Inch Nails kind of influence. There's a couple of songs on here that, I kind of like. But overall, this album just doesn't do much for me. Never did. It's long. And I don't know. So this is an album, Strangers When We Meet. That's a good one. What's the Heart's Filthy Lesson? That was a really great track. But one great track doesn't make an album. And Outside for me is a Bowie album that I just don't really care for. And I love Bowie. And Bob Dylan just took a plunge. All right, let's stick Bowie somewhere over there for now. All right, let's keep going. All right. There's bands that you love, that I love, and in their heyday, they were so great, and then they try to make a comeback, and you really give them the best shot that you have. I'm talking about a band called Nektar, and, Tab in the Ocean, and Remember the Future, and Down to Earth, and Recycled. These are amazing prog rock classics. They're as good as any of the other ones in prog rock. That was their time. And then they reform and they come back and they do the best they can. And I'm supporting the band, man. I'm buying Time Machine. Any of you people buying these albums? Doubtful. But Time Machine, Book of Days, Evolution. This is the reform Nektar. Prodigal Son, Man in the Moon. They're okay albums. They're certainly not great. I'm glad they reform. I'm glad they put them out, but they're not that golden patch. But that's fine. They're coming back trying to make a living. And I actually saw them live, and they were fine. But in desperation, they did this thing, A Spoonful of Time. Man, it's a covers album. Do I really need to hear Nektar, not in their heyday, doing covers of these songs? The answer is no, at least for me. So, Nektar, A Spoonful of Time. Let's stick that over there, because that is definitely not a highlight of their catalog. All right, let's keep going. Well, I guess you would find this on a lot of lists. Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I'm a fan, of course. Legendary progressive band, some great work. I don't love everything EOP's ever done. But this is the album that everybody trashes. And I got to say, yeah, I'm kind of with you. Love Beach was their last hurrah around their first go-round. It's got the Bee Gees type cover. But listen, they were trying to survive. This is a Japanese version of it. The problem with this album is I don't find it awful. It's not like unlistenable. It's just there's nothing really on here that grabs you. They do a good version of Canario. That's kind of cool. But it's just a nothing Emerson, Lake and Palmer album. So there's a reason why it's on like everybody's list. Now, they have other albums that are not very good. I actually, when they reformed, I thought Black Moon was a pretty strong record. It was a good mixture of modern sounds with EOP, not overly progressive. That's a pretty strong record, I thought. Then they followed that up with In the Hot Seat. A lot of people might put this against Love Beach. But I actually think some of the songs on here are pretty good. Daddy, I think, is amazing. And Man in a Long Black Coat is a Dylan cover. So I would prefer this even over Love Beach. All right, let's keep going. Now, what's up here? While we're in the mood of progressive rock, let's talk about Yes. Yes is a band that's catalog is, you talk about a band with ups and downs and a million different lineups. There's a lot of albums that you could choose for albums I hate by bands I love. But I'm going to pick one from Yes that has a reason, You could easily choose that Billy Sherwood album they did with the black cover. I don't even have that one. It was so god-awful. I got rid of that. Remember, I'm talking about albums that are in my collection. I've tried some of the latter day. Yeah, Open My Eyes, Open Your Eyes. That's the name of that one. Boy, that was god-awful. Some of the latter day Yes, I can't even give them a shot anymore because to me they're nothing but they're not even Yes anymore to me. It's a Steve Howe cover band, basically. But I've tried, what was that, Heaven and Earth or Heaven and Hell, whatever the name of that one. It was just innocuous. There was nothing to it. It wasn't terrible, unlistenable, but just nothing I liked. But there was a Yes album that really kind of pissed me off, and I'm going to tell you why. So if you go back to like 73 with Tales from Topographic Oceans, that's an album I really like, but I got to be in the mood for it. Then after that, Rick Wakeman hates the album. He leaves. They come back and they do Relayer with Patrick Moraz. A lot of people love Relayer. I don't. It's actually one of my least favorite Yes albums. It almost could have been on here, but it's not god awful. It's just messy, whatever. Then they bring Rick Wakeman back and they do Going for the One, which is actually one of my favorite Yes albums. I love this album. I think this album is as good. And it's part of, to me, their classic run with the Yes album and Close to the Edge and Fragile and Yes songs. That's how good Going for the One is. So now they got the classic lineup. Rick Wakeman's in there, and they follow up Going for the One with Tomato. Now, a lot of people have talked about this album. I would include this as albums that I hate by bands I love. And the reason why is, one, I still own it. Two, because it was such a letdown from Going for the One that it makes it special. You know, that opened my eyes, or these latter-day Yes albums that are terrible. Maybe they are. Maybe Tomato is better than those. But because it was such a letdown from this album, it just kills me. There's very little on this album. I remember Don't Kill the Whale was the initial single, and I thought it was interesting. I thought it was a good song. But I remember thinking the mix, it was just lacking. And there's something lacking on just about everything on this album. Even Don't Kill the Whale, as much as I like that, it's just frustrating to me. I will say that Onward, which I think is the Chris Squire song, that song is one of the most amazing Yes songs in their catalog. But luckily I have it on other albums that I don't have to listen to Tomato to hear it. So Onward is incredible. If you don't know that song, you need to hear that song. So we're going to put that album from Yes in here as well, because that album frustrated the hell out of me. And that's what we're going to talk about on some of these other ones. So even this album I'm going to put, now this is going to annoy some people. I'm a big fan of Steely Dan, and their classic run when they started was amazing, right? And then, they do Asia, they hit their commercial peak, Royal Scam Before Here, that was incredible. And their first album was great. Then they did Gaucho, and that was a really good record, but I didn't love it nearly as much as the predecessors. But, Hey 19 was a huge hit. Then they take their break, and they come back with Two Against Nature. And boy, did the critics trip over themselves on this thing. Oh, it's the greatest thing in the world. I picked it up, and I'm like, it did well. Commercially, it was very successful. And Cousin Dupree was a really good song. It's a fine album. It's a good album. It won the Grammy for Best Album of the Year, plus other awards as well. And it's just annoying to me. It's not really about this album. It's about the outside. It's annoying to me when people and critics trip over themselves saying that this is the greatest thing. This album, for me, is not even a patch on any of the previous Steely Dan albums. It's fine for what it is. It was good that they came back. It was really successful. But when you listen to Steely Dan, is that the album you go to? Because it's certainly not the one that I go to, I can tell you that. Let's talk about the critics factor as well. So me, like most people, were unaware of Big Star when they first came out. The albums bombed. Nobody really knew who they were. But certainly Radio City and Number One Record are incredible albums, and I love these albums, right? And then the band would have fist fights, and they would punch each other, and then they broke up, and, Chris Bell left, and there was only two guys left. It was Alex Chilton and the drummer, Jody Stevens, and they did their third album, which was going to be called Sister Lovers. And it was so uncommercial and so unsuccessful, the record company wouldn't even release it. And they finally released it after this twofer became successful. And so I picked it up, eventually, and then I got it on this version as well. This was on Rykodisc. It's another one of those albums where the critics are like, no, this is the best thing they ever did. This is one of the greatest albums of all time. Yeah, it's a harrowing listen. It's dark, the song Holocaust. But I don't like when people make things out bigger than they are. This is not an easy listen, and that's fine. Not every album is supposed to be hooky and poppy and stick in your head. But I don't think it's all that good. I really don't, and I've tried. It's not a patch on Number One Record or Radio City. So I'm going to put Big Star's third album, Sister Lovers, in there as an album that I very rarely listen to. And it's just not that good. It's certainly nothing like the critics will say it is, in my opinion. Which leads me to Mr. Roger Waters. Because Roger Waters is an interesting fellow, musically wise. And I'll never forget, after The Wall, the following album that they put out was The Final Cut. Rolling Stone magazine, I think, gave this album 5 stars, if I remember right. And said it was like the greatest thing they ever did. And I'm like, so I bought it right away, and I'm like, are you listening to the same album I'm listening to? This is clearly nothing more than a Roger Waters solo record, which was fine. The other guy supplemented to that. But it's the reft of melody, hooks, anything that's sticking in my head, really. It's just kind of a slog, and this is not an easy listen. I know what it's about. I know it's dark and gloomy, and that's what he wanted. Not Now John, that's the most commercial cut on there, and that's a really good cut. The final track's okay. Southampton Doc, he's performed some of these live, and I've seen him perform some of these live. But overall, it's just okay. I don't really like this album. I don't know if I would say I hate it, but I don't really like it. It's very Roger Waters. If you have Roger Waters solo stuff like me, you appreciate the great connection he had songwriting-wise with David Gilmour, because clearly David Gilmour is a guy who knows how to put in the melodies and the hooks and the stuff that's a little bit more memorable. This is another good example. The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking by Roger Waters. I've listened to this album a ton since it came out, and it's just a good example of Roger Waters solo, where it's a difficult listen. It's just lacking. It just doesn't grab you. It's just 45 minutes of the same kind of a theme over and over again, and I just kind of wish David Gilmour was on there to pep it up and give it some melody. So there you have that. Let's continue. How we doing? We're going to talk about U2, the band that so many people love to hate, but not me, because I love U2. And in fact, I think U2 is pretty unique in the sense that their latter-day albums are phenomenal, as good as their early albums. I got into them really from their first album, hearing them play at Malibu on their first tour over the radio, and I saw them on the War Tour. But anybody's going to tell me All That You Can't Leave Behind, and this album, No Line of Horizon, and How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. These are amazing albums, I think. And then they put out this album, Songs of Innocence, and this album got trashed by everybody, probably because of that Apple thing, but I don't care. This album is incredible. Other artists, in my opinion, would give their arm for just a couple of songs that are on this album. That's how great this album is. But the follow-up to that album was Songs of Experience. And for me, this was the first U2 album where it just really didn't grab me. And it hurt me. It bothered me. I'm like, man, this album was so amazing. The ones before it were so amazing. But this album just hasn't done much for me. Do I hate it? No. But I don't really like it either. And that's why it's here. U2. What else can we talk about? Let's talk about Bruce Springsteen. Bruce Springsteen is really interesting for me. I consider myself a really big Bruce Springsteen fan. Have all of his albums, tons of bootlegs. But he's an interesting guy in the sense that I don't love everything he does. I love Springsteen albums to death, and then there's Springsteen albums that just don't do much for me. And this is a Springsteen album that has never done much for me, and that is called Devils and Dust. This is a dual disc, and it's just, again, a heavy listen. It just never grabbed onto me for whatever reason, and I've tried. So, Devils and Dust. Do I hate it? I mean, I guess in a way I do. I certainly never listened to it, and it's never one that I would pick up. In fact, I even tried, here's bootlegs of all of his tours, and here's a bootleg from that tour. I appreciate Springsteen, his artistry, and all the rest, but that album just never did much for me. Let's talk about the band Heart. I was into the band Heart when they first started. Dreamboat Annie, one of the greatest debuts of all time, and Little Queen, and Dog and Butterfly was great, and Baby Lestrange was good. And then they did this Private Audition album, and this was an album that really bombed. They did a bad single This Man Is Mine. But it's a pretty strong record for Heart. I liked it, but I knew the wheels had come off and they were pretty much done. And then they released this album called Passion Works. And this album for me was the first Heart album where I was like, ugh, I really don't like this album. How Can I Refuse? It was a great track. Some really good. Sleep Alone was a great track. Language of Love could have been a great track. The production on it was just of its time. And the album just stiffed, and it stiffed for me. It's my first Heart album where I was like, ugh, and it didn't do much. And obviously it bothered them because a couple of years ago they released this album called Beautiful Broken, and they took songs from that album and Private Audition and redid them because they felt a lot of those songs were missing. So it's a cool idea that Heart did that, to try to get people to recognize that, at least on Private Audition, and in that, there's some songs that are buried. I think I got two more. Geils Band, I'm a huge fan. But if you're going to fire your lead singer, Peter Wolf, one of the greatest frontmen and singers in the history of rock and roll, at the peak of your powers after doing, Love Stinks and Freeze Frame, and you fire him and you put out an album, you're getting even while I'm getting odd. That's really odd. It's like if the Stones fired Mick Jagger and put out an album with, Ronnie Wood and just Keith singing it. Strange concept. So I'm going to throw in this album because I love the Geils Band. This took a lot of guts, but Peter Wolf won that battle because his solo stuff is just phenomenal. And that's the legacy that Geils left over after. One more I'm going to do, and I'm just going to do this for shock value. When Keith Richards released Cross-Eyed Heart, I didn't know it was coming. I don't think most people knew it was. He dropped it pretty surprisingly, and I was pretty pumped up. Talk Is Cheap, I think, is probably the strongest solo Stones album, and Main Offender is half great, half good. The live album, Live at the Hollywood Bowl Palladium, whatever that is great. But he released this album, and I was like, man, you talk about a disappointing album for me, one of the biggest Stones fans. This album, I look at it now, and I'm like, do I remember any of these songs? No. It was just a nothing with nothing album to me, and it was really disappointing. When it came out, I was like, shocked that this is what he released instead of the Stones working on something. Keith is always apt to just pick on Mick Jagger's solo career. But does anybody love this album? Let me know. There was one amazing song on here. I think it was Rob Blind. That was a great track. I can't even find it. Rob Blind, I think that's on this album. That was a great track. But other than that, a really forgettable album from Keith Richards. And that drove me crazy as such a big Stones fan. So there you have it, folks. I think there's about 20 albums I just covered in about a half hour. I hope you enjoyed this. Albums that I hate for various reasons from artists that I love. I hope you enjoyed that. I'd love to hear your comments. Let me know what you think. And hope you're having a great weekend or had a great weekend. If you're new to my channel, hit subscribe and check out the playlist. And I'll see you next time on The Alan Rosenberg Show.